Hello and welcome to SBK Unplugged, Sheldon Bosley Knight's Land and Property podcast. My name is Kate Gould and I'm the host of the show. Today I'm in the studio with our lettings director, Rebecca Dean, hello,
Hi.
and special guest, Collette Naylor, who's Senior Partnership Manager at Flatfair. Before we start, I would like to say a massive thank you once again to Mill Street in the heart of Leamington Spa for hosting us in their amazing studio. So thank you guys very much again. So today we are discussing Sheldon Bosley Knight's partnership with Flatfair and how I suppose it's transforming the rental experience for both landlords and tenants.
Yeah.
But before we get down to the sort of nitty gritty, it would be really good, Collette, if you could just explain briefly what Flatfair is and what it does.
Of course, yeah. So thanks firstly for having me on today's podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So Flatfair is a deposit alternative. Many landlords will be unfamiliar with the concept, but ultimately what we are is the option of tenants having a lower upfront moving cost, but we give landlords double the protection of a traditional deposit. Currently, landlords will opt for a 5-week traditional deposit, but where Flatfair will offer double that. So we offer 10 weeks protection to landlords free of charge.
Right, okie dokie. So, Becca, with that in mind, why did Sheldon Bosley Knight decide to partner with Flatfair? How did it all come about?
Well, I think this is all just forming part of the review of our business, the services that we offer to landlords, and strengthening those really. We talk a lot about the rent guarantee, protecting landlords, and this is another way to be able to offer landlords more protection. So when the tenant fee ban came in 2019, we were in a position where we couldn't charge tenants any more than 5 weeks rent as a deposit. So when we talk about a traditional deposit, that's what that refers to. So we were no longer in a position where we could ask the tenants to pay more deposit if they had a pet, pay a higher deposit if there was poor credit, or if they just couldn't meet the referencing criteria. Sometimes a landlord would request for a bigger security deposit, so they got that money there to fall back on if anything should happen. But we've not been able to do that. So for the last 6 years, it's been 5 weeks of the rent as a traditional deposit, and we can't take any more than that. So just reviewing what we're offering to landlords and strengthening our offering, our services. We wanted to look at a way that landlords could be protected through the deposit, and started looking at deposit alternative options that were available. Flatfair is one that I've actually worked with before, so I have got a historic relationship with Collette, which is nice. But also Flatfair, in our opinion, is the best one that is out there in the marketplace. Flatfair also works with HomeLet. So what it does mean is that those past references on a tenant will mean that the tenant and the landlord qualify for having the Flatfair plan put into place. So as Colette's already mentioned, the Flatfair plan gives 10 weeks of protection to landlords. So they've got double the amount of what the traditional deposit would offer. But what it also does is it gives the tenants a little bit more freedom to be able to move without upfront moving costs.
Yeah.
So tenants that might currently be in a tenancy and they've got a traditional deposit tied up with another agent or in a deposit scheme, tenants that, they might be selling a property, haven't yet got funds available from that. But also it just reduces those costs in general. That there are more and more tenants now that don't really like the idea that large deposit, that big sum of money is going to be in an agent's bank account or sitting in a deposit scheme for the length of their tenancy, which could be 6 months, 12 months, it could be 5 years. So this is a way that tenants have got more freedom to move without having to sacrifice that upfront cost and have it sitting in somebody else's account for several years potentially.
So it sounds a bit of a win-win, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
And so how long has the partnership been running?
So we're just in our 3rd month.
Yeah.
So we started the partnership with Flatfair beginning of February.
Yeah.
Had a really, really great start. So the way that is being offered now is it is part of our service to landlords. So if the property is fully managed by Sheldon Bosley Knight or the Lovitz or Andrew Granger brand, the landlord has the option, we're offering it, but the landlord has the option to opt out if it's not something that they want. So with advertising that then as a deposit alternative on their property, it's then the tenant's choice as to whether they move forward with it. But we've had a really good start, haven't we?
Really successful.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you had much feedback from landlords and tenants so far? I mean, I know it's early days, but
positive feedback. We've had a couple of testimonials from landlords, which we've recently shared with Flatfair. Probably should have brought those with me today, actually. But also the teams that are working with it, you know, the staff within our branches, they've really got on board with the offering. They understand what it means to a landlord. They understand how it helps a tenant. And with all of that in mind and pulling it together, the teams are really on board with it, which means that we're getting some really good results and ultimately protecting more landlords.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really good, isn't it? So, Collette, what then would you say were the key benefits for in terms of the Flatfair solution?
So ultimately, it's a product that's designed to protect landlords and to give them more protection. Becca touched on that obviously landlords are unable to request a higher deposit if they didn't meet the referencing criteria or if they had a pet. And I think off the back of COVID, a lot of landlords fell short by not having any rent and legal protection in place, and tenants unfortunately may have been made redundant and properties may have fallen into disrepair, whereas with Flatfair, they have the option of receiving 10 weeks protection completely free of charge, and that 10 weeks protection is split equally between rent arrears and damages. So they can claim up to 5 weeks of rent arrears and 5 weeks of damages. Or if there was no rent arrears at the end of the tenancy, they can claim up to 10 weeks in damages. The benefit to the tenants is that they have the option of a lower upfront moving cost. So as Becca mentioned, if they didn't have the funds to provide 1 month's rent and a 5-week deposit, or they just didn't want to, they have the option to take Flatfair. It is presented to them as a choice. You can't force tenants into this, and the way that the platform is designed is to present it side by side.
Right, okay. So presumably there may be some landlords and tenants who are maybe a bit sceptical or have some misconceptions. So what are you able to outline some of those misconceptions to put landlords and tenants' minds at ease? Because it sounds like a really good scheme.
Well, it sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? So I mean, the biggest misconception from a landlord's perspective, is if they can't afford a deposit, how do I know they can afford to pay the rent? We're trying to dispel that myth. Tenants have to pass referencing. They have to meet the eligibility criteria. Sheldon Bosley Knight are partnered with HomeLet, which are an incredible referencing provider. If they pass with HomeLet, then they will be accepted by Flatfair. But if they have any CCJs or bankruptcy or adverse credit in place, we will not be able to offer it them. And if the landlord chooses to proceed with that tenant, it will be on the basis of accepting a traditional deposit only, which will only protect them with 5 weeks. So it's not a case of it being offered to tenants with no money. It opens it up to a wider audience of tenants, because if a tenant didn't pass referencing today, they wouldn't, they wouldn't be able to pay a traditional deposit either.
Right.
And I think that just comes back to the referencing. Obviously, we had HomeLet on the last podcast, and we talked about how important the referencing criteria is, and getting tenants through that process. That's not just so that the landlord can be offered the protection on the rent and legal expenses. It's also for Flatfair as well. So as Collette said, it's not just a case of, here we go, here's this fantastic super duper product, which means you don't have to pay a 5-week deposit. There is still a criteria that has to be met so that the landlord knows that they've got a quality tenant within the property.
Right. Okay.
Other misconceptions, you'll have landlords that might say, well, what happens if the tenant doesn't pay and runs away at the end of the tenancy? If a tenant chooses to ignore charges that they've agreed to or that have been adjudicated against them, then Flatfair will offer to purchase that debt from the landlord in order for us to pay them.
Right.
So there is a specific time frame that a tenant does have to respond to a checkout bill that's provided, but if they choose to ignore that, and they've already agreed to the charges, then we will offer to purchase the debt on behalf of the landlord.
Right. So it sounds like, it's good for both parties. have you seen a decent take up then? I mean, once these things have been explained to both the landlords and the tenants, is that easing people's minds?
It is. I mean, currently you're acting at around 60% landlord adoption at the moment for the group, which is incredible to say that they're in their second month. It's an extremely high uptake from landlords. A lot of them find this as the concept's a bit too new. I'd like to wait and see. We've been established since 2017. We're not a fly-by-night business. We work with some huge partners and build-to-rent operators as well in the UK. So we're not just we've not just popped up 6 months ago. We are a well-established business. It's. I think the way that obviously it is presented to them is the biggest thing. If you were having a conversation with the landlord today and said we've got a product called no deposit, it's amazing, they're just going to say no thanks, because that's all they hear is no deposit, whereas it's part of their fully managed service to offer them 10 weeks protection alongside a traditional deposit. Ultimately, the landlord has to offer it on the property. You can't give it to a tenant unless a landlord's agreed to market with it.
Right, and then of course it goes through all the checks, and so if the tenant passes the checks, but and has agreed, then that's
that's right. And as Colette's just mentioned, the words no deposit, which Collette knows I'm not a fan of myself, because of the message that does tend to deliver. So we advertise it as a deposit alternative. We have had some really good results from the landlord uptake. In terms of tenants, I think we're sitting just under 30%, but bearing in mind we can only offer this to fully managed landlords. It's not something that can be offered to tenant find. Right. So in terms of the move-in volume that we've done over the last couple of months, I'm sure we're around about 30% of
35%. I think it was 34.8%, which is a fantastic uptake to say that they've just launched with us. Tenants that indicate that they are only interested in a traditional deposit, we find that 56% of them change their mind when they are presented the choice side by side. They're doing it in the comfort of their own home. They're operating it via, a laptop or a tablet. They're able to just make that decision themselves. You will have some landlords that will want this as their only option, but ultimately it is the tenant's choice. But you get tenant feedback in terms of tenant objections is, well, I have the money for a deposit. I don't want to lose 1 week's rent plus VAT, and that is absolutely fine. It is tenant choice at the end of the day. Other tenants might say, well, what if I don't agree with charges at the end of the tenancy? And tenants have the opportunity they can review charges, they can accept them, reject them, and also counter offer against them, just as they would with a traditional deposit. It's not a case of we are all in favour of landlords. We are fair to all parties. They have that opportunity to do that as well.
But it seems that there's a bit of an extra protection for both parties.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose with the Renters' Rights Bill that's coming in, at some point probably this year, that is going to be important for landlords to consider as well, because we're still in a bit of an unknown situation, but there have been murmurings of no rent up front and things like that, so I guess it adds another level of protection for landlords. And that's one of the reasons why obviously we've talked a lot about the Renters' Rights Bill as well, and it's all we seem to hear in the industry at the moment, but that is what's forming part of the review of the services that we offer to landlords. So it's making us ask those questions of how can we protect them better, how can we offer them more peace of mind. That we've got landlords exiting the market at the moment, and obviously we don't want that to happen. We've already got an issue with stock versus demand, so more landlords exiting the market generally means rents are going to continue to go up, and things just become more and more strained. So this is hopefully another way that landlords can see that, do you know what, actually being a landlord is not so bad. If the referencing's completed and everything fits, I've got this protection here, I can take this protection over here. Ultimately with Flatfair, it is the tenant's final decision, because it is a charge to the tenant. The tenant will pay 1 week's rent for the Flatfair plan to be put in place, and that's non-refundable, and that's in place of the 5-week traditional deposit.
And that sorry to interrupt, but that doesn't count towards charges either at the end of a tenancy. It's a one-off fee that they pay at the start, which is non-refundable. So some tenants will say, well, why don't I get it back? And it's the option for them. They can either pay a 5-week traditional deposit and have that locked away in a scheme for however long the tenancy lasts, or they have the option of paying that one-off fee, which they don't get back and does not count as charges at the end of the tenancy. They are separate.
Yeah.
So it is hopefully another way that we can help landlords, protect landlords, and give them something good, really, to focus on, rather than all of the worry about increasing costs and non-payment of rent and those horror stories that unfortunately we do get from time to time, where tenants don't look after properties and the landlords are left with a huge bill at the end of the tenancy. So this is another way that as a business we can help to protect landlords and provide more peace of mind.
Yeah, it's a good point you've just raised there. It's probably worth mentioning that Flatfair offers a debt recovery service as well for anything beyond that 10 weeks protection level. So as an example, if a landlord had 15 weeks worth of charges and that amounted to rent arrears and damages, and Flatfair successfully was able to pay out the 10 weeks, we will still actively chase the tenant for the additional sums that are owed. We do charge a recovery fee on the additional amount, but that isn't something that they get with a traditional deposit. A lot of landlords sadly have to write debt off in order to move on to the next tenancy. They don't have the funds to take a tenant to court. They find it stressful. It's timely as well. Whereas with Flatfair, we will still be working in the background to try and recover as much money owed to that landlord as possible.
Because that's an extra stress for landlords, isn't it? And especially with the court system as it is at the moment, and the worries about, the abolition of Section 21 and what that will do to an already overstretched court system. I would say then that's another tick in the box.
It is. It's another added benefit, which, as I said, they don't get with a traditional deposit. So not only are they going to get 10 weeks protection, but we will still look to recover the additional money that is owed to them.
I think that there's a lot of landlords that will have, this intention of pursuing a tenant to be able to recover the funds that they've had to pay out, but generally the work's been done, the property's relet, there's a new tenant in situ, the rent's being paid again, and it tends to then just be a stress and a hassle that they either don't want to move forward with, or it does just get pushed to one side. So
but that can be an expensive stress and hassle, can't
absolutely.
it? So if you've got that added layer of protection, that must give landlords extra peace of mind, which obviously at this time must be very welcome.
Absolutely. More and more landlords are getting on board with the idea of deposit alternatives, but a lot of the landlords that agents that I work with are quite old school in their approach, because they find this is too good to be true, or the concept's too new. I think the only time that they'll consider additional protection, whether that be through a deposit alternative or even rental legal protection, is when they've been left with a very nasty end of tenancy experience, and 5-week traditional deposit has just been swallowed up in thousands of pounds worth of charges.
So sort of making it simpler and fairer for everybody, which is really good.
Well, that's what we're here for, isn't it? So, and again, it is the importance of that agent and supplier relationship as well. Collette is our account manager. She's constantly checking in with the teams, just making sure that everybody is comfortable with it, checking where any training may be needed. So that's
a great business to work
obviously
with.
It's massively important that we've got that relationship between the agent and the supplier to make it work for everybody.
Excellent. And so if landlords have not signed up yet, and tenants haven't signed up yet, but they're keen to find out more and explore it at their leisure, I suppose, flatfair.co.uk, and you talking to you, Becca, and your teams.
Absolutely. Anybody within the branch can provide the information on it. As a business at the moment, this is something that we're offering to landlords and tenants on new lets. But there is also an additional service where a deposit can be unlocked. So if a landlord wanted to have a Flatfair plan in place, and the tenant was happy to agree to it and pay that 1 week's rent, they can then have their deposit released and this protection can be put in place. I know that's not something that we've discussed yet for the business.
We're not working on it
yet, but it is something
that is an option. So if any landlords are interested in offering Flatfair that have a tenant currently in one of their properties, reach out to one of the branches, and then we can discuss offering Flatfair to that tenant. Again, it's the tenant's choice, but you'll find that some tenants will be like, yeah, hey, I want my cash back. And then, you know, they'll have to pay for Flatfair first in order for that protection to be in place for the landlord, and then the deposit will be released out of their current deposit scheme.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds fantastic. So
good.
Here's to a long and happy partnership.
Yeah,
that sounds
Absolutely.
great. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for coming in. It's been really lovely to have a chat.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next time.